Welcome. Divine mandate. If someone studies you more closely than they study themselves, they've already lost. Some people don't like you very much, and then there are others who make you their full-time job. This story isn't about random enemies or jealousy that isn't serious. This is about being obsessed. The kind that watches, tracks, copies, tests, and gets worse but still can't figure out why you won't break. At some point, this stopped being a personal grudge and became a campaign. Most people don't want to admit this, but obsession always leads to the opposite of what you want. Psychologists have long noted that entrenched adversaries gradually forfeit their objectivity. Their minds become more focused, and their feelings take over their plans. Instead of making plans, they start to react. And when that happens, the person being watched quietly gets an edge, even if they don't know it. That's what happened here. What you were dealing with wasn't just resistance. It was a planned attempt to learn about your reactions, limits, and patterns. Every setback was meant to help you find your way. Every provocation was meant to get information. But instead of becoming predictable, you did something that was hard for me. You changed. And while you were changing, the people who were trying to bring you down kept using the same old tricks, but louder and more desperate. It's funny how the more they paid attention to you, the clearer you got. You began to see patterns in the timing, repetition, and motives that didn't make sense. When you see the pattern, the illusion falls apart. What seemed scary starts to look sloppy, almost embarrassing, like someone reading your old messages again while saying they're not bothered at all. That's where the funny part comes in. At some point, you realize you're not in danger. You're just being checked by someone who keeps failing their own test. This isn't a story about magic or make-believe. It's about how power works, being aware of it, and what happens when someone doesn't respond on time. When you stop dancing to the music, it gets really awkward for the person playing it. So, if you've ever felt like resistance was following you too closely, like problems were too personal, or like some people were too interested in your failure, stay right here. What you're going to hear isn't dramatic. It's a diagnosis. And once you know what was really going on behind the scenes, a lot of things will make sense. First of all, the obsession wasn't about killing you. It was about controlling your frequency. What most people don't get is that real obsession doesn't try to get rid of things first. It wants to get in. The person who was fixated on you wasn't trying to get you off the board. They were trying to figure out how you work, why you move the way you do, and what makes you so unsettling that they can copy it. If that was the real goal, it would have been easy to destroy. That's what they wanted, harder control. They studied you because your presence made them feel less powerful. You didn't follow the rules that they needed to feel safe. You didn't act the way you were supposed to when you were expected to, break down when you were under pressure, or chase validation when you were teased. People who need to feel powerful through manipulation, influence, or fear don't like that kind of self-contained energy. So instead of taking a step back, they leaned in too close. Every time someone tried to throw you off, they were really trying to get into your rhythm. They wanted to get a reaction from them that they could use, a weakness that they could take advantage of, and a habit that they could guess. But what they found was order where there should have been chaos. You kept your cool under stress. You didn't break into parts that they could handle. That's when interest turned into obsession. People only try to own things they secretly admire or are afraid of. This is the uncomfortable truth. They don't worry about things they think are below them. Your clear speech showed how confused they were. Your steadiness showed how much they relied on tricks. Instead of admitting they were wrong, they tried to figure you out like a puzzle that needed answers. But you can't borrow your frequency. It was made to feed, not to work. You don't hold it because you learn it how to do it. You hold it because you don't want to live in a way that doesn't match who you are. That's why every time someone tried to copy you, it didn't work. They could copy behaviors, say the same things, and even copy timing, but none of it meant anything. The obsession fell apart as soon as they realized they couldn't get this. You weren't a source that could be drained. You were a system that keeps going. And when the truth hit home, fear took the place of confidence. When someone can't own your frequency, the only thing they can do is back off and act like they weren't watching you so closely in the first place. Number 2, every demon that was sent was a test, and you passed every one. It wasn't just bad luck that made it seem like there was always pressure. It was stress that was meant to be measured by how you react when you're pushed. Each challenge was meant to make you feel a certain way, like fear, anger, desperation, or self-doubt, not because they wanted chaos, but because reactions tell you things. Information gives you power, and in any secret war, leverage is the real money. The first wave was light, little problems, small betrayals, and some confusion. That part was all about watching. They were watching to see what makes you angry, how quickly you get over it, and if you blame yourself. You didn't. You made changes without saying anything. That one thing messed up the whole plan. So, they got worse, losses got worse, the opposition got louder. People started to act weird when you were around. The goal was to overload your system and make you go into a predictable survival mode. At that point, most people either freeze, blow up, or fold in on themselves. You didn't pick any of those. You stayed useful. You kept on thinking. That made you more dangerous than they had planned for. Every time someone tried to break you, it showed how flexible you really are. You learned it more quickly when you were under stress. You saw patterns faster. You stopped expecting things to be fair and started looking for motives. That change was enough to make the test stop working. You weren't just dealing with the stress. You were learning from it. What really scared them was that you didn't come out angry. You didn't lose who you are. The tests didn't make you bad. Your judgment didn't get worse. It got better. You didn't get harder. You got clearer. That result wasn't on their chart. It was too late by the time they figured out what was going on. You had learned it from every challenge they sent. They expected trauma, but you had already built up tolerance. They expected confusion, but you had already built up awareness. They expected collapse, but you had already built up calm. They were still gathering information while you were changing the rules inside. The biggest mistake wasn't thinking you were weak. It was thinking you were weak in the first place. They kept testing someone who had already grown out of the need to prove anything. And if all the tests come back clean, the only thing you can say is that the system that is testing you is the one that is broken. Third, you didn't fight demons. You outgrew their system. At some point, the fight stopped feeling like a fight and started to feel old. Not because the pressure went away, but because the strategy stopped making sense to you. The same triggers, mind games, and emotional traps kept coming back. And instead of reacting, you saw how easy it was to guess what they would do next. That's when growth slowly took over. People who are stuck in old patterns of fear, guilt, urgency, and needing approval are what make those systems work. Those are the buttons they push, but you didn't wire those buttons the same way. You changed how you deal with stress. Instead of believing stories, you questioned them. They thought you would panic, but you slowed down. And as soon as you did that, they lost some of their power. It doesn't look like much when a system grows out of it. There isn't a loud win. It seems like boredom has replaced anxiety. It seems clearer now than it did before. You stopped arguing with manipulation because you didn't understand what it was saying anymore. And if something can't talk to you, it can't control you. They kept sending the same energy, hoping that the old you would respond. But that version was no longer available. You had made changes inside. You were acting out of awareness instead of reaction. That's why things that used to seem heavy suddenly made sense. It's not hard. It's just clear. Your sense of time really changed. You stopped letting urgency run your life. You didn't hurry to fix everything or tell me what was wrong. You learned that the person who sets the trap benefits from speed, while the person who sees it benefits from slowness. That alone stopped half of the tactics that were being used against you. The truth is that you didn't overpower anything. You made it not work. The attacks messed up, frowncy, and they failed. Just like old software that won't run on a system anymore. Not because you fought harder, but because you stopped putting food in the loop. That's the part that most people don't talk about. Growth isn't just getting stronger. It's also making old strategies useless. The game ends when you stop acting in the way that is expected of you. And as soon as you realize you're not fighting anymore, you know the war ended. When you stopped following rules that were never meant for you in the first place. 4. The Warlock didn't realize how clean your core really was. Most people think that everyone has hidden damage, secret fractures, or weaknesses that they can use to their advantage. That's exactly what your opponent thought. They thought they would find a dark corner, a weakness that had been buried under years of stress, or some part of you that could be controlled. They didn't know that your foundation wasn't just strong, it was also impossible to touch. They made a mistake because their tools couldn't tell how pure something was. Every time they tried to get you angry or set a trap, it was to show a weakness. They thought that putting pressure on it over and over would show cracks, but they didn't think about the fact that your honesty isn't up for debate. You don't let fear, greed, or pride run your life. You work from a place that won't accept anything toxic. You can't force or borrow that kind of inner alignment. It either exists or it doesn't. The more they pushed, the more clear it became that they were wrong. Every time they failed, they got more and more angry and shaken. Not only did they not try to control you, they didn't even understand you. That's the main reason why being obsessed can be dangerous for the person who is obsessed. When you go after someone who has no weaknesses you can take advantage of, your tactics get louder, more desperate, and ultimately backfire. They couldn't understand that being clean doesn't mean being naive, and being honest doesn't mean being weak. Your purity didn't make you weak, it made you strong. They thought they could break you, test you, or change you. Instead, every crime they committed showed how desperate they were. Every time they failed to do something, it showed that they couldn't control something that couldn't be corrupted. They embarrassed themselves over and over again by underestimating you. Their plan was to find leverage, but the flaw they were looking for just didn't exist. And that truth hurt more than any spell or trick could. When you realize that someone has been trying to break you and failing spectacularly, you understand something important. The only thing they can really touch is themselves, and you keep going without being shaken. It's not about being arrogant or in denial to be untouchable. It's about knowing what's true at your core, and that truth is a power that even the most obsessed warlock can't beat. Number 5. Your awareness broke spells before they could work. There is a level of perception that not only sees energy, but also stops it before it even lands. That's what you were working with. Every attempt to control, every ritual, every psychological attack, and every small act of sabotage was stopped not by force but by simply being aware of them. You didn't have to fight. You didn't have to defend yourself. You just saw it coming, knew what it was for, and it lost its power as soon as it was thought of. This is what scares someone who needs to be in charge. They think that fear, surprise, or confusion will work because they know how everyone else will react. But the effect stops working when someone sees how the scheme works. Not only were you avoiding traps, you were also changing the game by not giving it more ignorance. Every spell, every projection, and every attempt to throw you off balance failed because they all depended on you not knowing. And you did know. You weren't just aware. It wasn't a quiet observation from the sidelines. It was instinctive, active, and exact. You could sense patterns before they formed, read motives before they were spoken, and figure out what someone was going to do before they did it. For anyone whose plans depend on hidden influence, that level of clarity is very rare and very scary. Because of this, their bag of tricks became almost useless. They got louder, thinking that more noise could make up for less accuracy, and that repeating themselves could catch you off guard. But awareness works on a different time scale than fear or action. You weren't just avoiding attacks, you were breaking them down from the inside out. Every time they failed, they had to rethink, scramble, and come up with new ideas, and every mistake showed how much they needed control that they couldn't get. It's funny how obsessed they got with you made you look better. They thought that power came from doing things, from controlling things, and from being too much. You showed that true power is being able to see, understand, and stop something before it becomes a threat. Awareness isn't just a way to protect yourself, it's also a way to disarm. And by the time they figured it out, the war had already turned in your favor for good. 6. They thought your restraint was a sign of weakness and paid for it over and over. They didn't understand what you did, which is why they thought you were lying. They thought you couldn't or were too scared to lash out, tell everyone, or get back at them in public. In their world, power only sounds like noise, so they thought you were being passive when you stayed calm. That mistake turned out to be their biggest one. You didn't hold back because you wanted to be nice or keep the peace. It was about having power. You knew that the person who set the trap would have the upper hand if you reacted too quickly. You knew that not every attack needs a response, and not every provocation needs your energy. You were picking the right time while they were swinging wildly. And timing always beats impulse. They kept getting worse because they thought that pressure would make you do something. They attack you more loudly, make bolder moves, and try to shake you up in public more often. Every time you didn't act the way they thought you would, they became more sure of the wrong conclusion. They thought they were winning because you weren't doing anything. You were really gathering information, watching patterns repeat, and letting them show you who they really were. Most people don't have the strength to hold back. It means not letting your ego talk when it wants to. It means letting lies stay around long enough for the truth to come out. It means having faith that order will last longer than chaos. They didn't get that kind of power, so they kept pushing. Every push made their position weaker. When you finally moved, it wasn't emotional. It was like surgery. You didn't go into too much detail. You didn't make it sound like a big deal. You acted with precision in the openings they had made for themselves by going too far. That's when the mood shifted. Confidence turned into doubt. Bravery turned into going back. They were suddenly the ones trying to control the story. They paid for the mistake because restraint isn't the same as not having strength. It's strength that is under control. You weren't frouncing. You were calm. And by the time they figured out what was wrong, it was too late. The damage was done, not to you, but to their credibility, their power, and the idea that they were ever in charge. Number 7. Each loss made the enemy stronger instead of breaking you. They didn't expect that failure has a direction. They thought that every loss would make you weaker, take away your energy, and wear you down little by little. That's how it usually goes when someone is always under stress. But this time, the damage went the other way. Every time you failed, it didn't hurt you, it hurt them. At first, they didn't think much of it. One mistake can be explained, two can be blamed on timing. But when losing happens over and over again, something changes inside. Confidence slowly fades away. Making decisions becomes messy. Doubt comes in, not as fear but as annoyance. And being angry is bad because it makes you less able to think clearly. You didn't have to touch them for this to happen. Their own mistakes did the work. You weren't taking the losses to heart at all. Oh, you weren't telling yourself that you were cursed, and lucky, or targeted because you were weak. You stayed in touch with reality. You changed. You learned it. You kept going without making a big deal out of what was going on. That calm response made the difference so clear. They started to fall apart while you stayed the same. They had to explain to themselves why they failed each time. What went wrong? What did they not see? That constant questioning changed the way they thought in bad ways. They became fixated on you, replaying events, overthinking what you did, and looking for flaws that weren't there. Obsession took the place of clarity. Fixation took the place of strategy. On the other hand, you didn't carry the emotional baggage from each meeting. You thought about it and then let it go. That's why you stayed on your toes. That's why you didn't get tougher or more reactive. You weren't gathering losses. You were gathering knowledge. And insight makes you stronger without making you feel heavy. The imbalance became clear after a while. They were on edge, in a hurry, and quick to react. You were calm, patient, and clear. The more they tried to get back in charge, the more obvious it was to others that they were unstable. Credibility fell. Support got weaker. Allies asked them questions. That's the quiet truth that most people miss. Failing over and over again doesn't just ruin plans. It changes the person who fails, and as they were being rewired by anger and despair, you were being improved by being aware. After that, there was never any doubt about what would happen. One side was getting better, and the other was falling apart. Number 8. The obsession got personal when you wouldn't break. What really made the difference wasn't your skill, your insight, or even your awareness. It was your refusal to give in. They had put in a lot of time and effort trying to make you unstable, control you, or throw you into chaos. Every plan, spell, and attack was meant to break your mind or spirit in some way that could be measured. But you didn't break. You stayed whole. That refusal changed everything about the game. People who depend on manipulation do well when things go as planned. They thrive on the idea that pressure will cause things to fall apart. But when someone refuses to give in, that expectation doesn't work, and frustration turns into an obsession. They first saw it as a puzzle to solve or a challenge. At that point, it became personal. Their strategies didn't work. They were also embarrassing, and that shame made them obsessed. Not breaking isn't about ignoring threats or acting like you can't be broken. It's about staying clear-headed in the middle of chaos, knowing what's yours and what isn't, and not letting them see your reactions so they can use them. Every time they pushed you, hoping for a break, you responded with the same thing they couldn't expect. That alone was enough to break their plan. Obsession is a weapon in its own right. Once they saw that you weren't going to give in, the attacks changed from professional or strategic to emotional and random. Instead of being proactive, their plans became reactive. They weren't trying to win anymore. They were trying to explain why they couldn't control you. That's when they began to make mistakes that made your case stronger. They messed up the timing, misread your motives, and showed weaknesses in their own network because they were too focused on you. The more personal the obsession got, the more they told you about themselves, while you stayed calm, focused, and untouchable. In short, not breaking up put them in a weak position. They couldn't see or hear your strength, but they knew it was there. Every failed attempt, every attack that got worse, and every moment of obsession showed that they had not only underestimated your power, but also your very nature. And that understanding is what makes obsession turn into defeat. 9. Your presence brought out other demons that were hiding in plain sight. You didn't have to blame anyone or say anything for this to happen. It happened on its own. Things changed as soon as you walked into some rooms. The tone of conversations changed. People began to act strangely for no clear reason. Some people got defensive. Some people went on and on. If you suddenly pulled away, that wasn't a fluke. That was exposure without having to fight. This was so scary because you weren't trying to tell anyone anything. You weren't looking for mistakes or secrets. You just came as yourself, aware and grounded. And that kind of presence can mess up secret plans. When someone is dishonest, manipulative, or has bad intentions, they need comfort and cover. Your presence took both away. You see, darkness does well when it blends in. It needs noise, things to do, and people to agree with it to stay hidden. But you brought peace. You talked less than you listened. You saw things that didn't add up but didn't do anything about them. That alone made people feel uneasy. When someone knows they're being seen clearly and not judged, their masks start to come off. That's why you saw fights breaking out that had nothing to do with you. People turned against each other. Old alliances fell apart. Secrets got out. There were problems where there used to be fake peace. You didn't do that. You showed it. Anyone who benefits from keeping things hidden will feel like an attack when they're revealed. Some people tried to make you feel bad about yourself. Others left your life without saying a word. Some people tried to hurt you before you could tell everyone about them, even though you weren't going to. That's how you could tell something more serious was going on. When clarity walks into the room, innocent people don't freak out. The most telling thing is this: once those hidden dynamics were revealed, they couldn't be hidden again. The damage was done even after you left some places. The trust was broken. People asked about their roles. The structure broke, and all you did was live without hurting yourself. That's a level of power most people don't understand. You weren't fighting demons directly. You were acting as a filter. Anything false struggled to remain stable around you. Anything that wasn't honest got loud. Anything that tried to control others lost its power. Ultimately, the reason for the obsession becoming stronger became clear. You weren't just a target. You were a risk to everything that needed to stay secret. And nothing scares hidden darkness more than someone who shows it without even trying. 10. You set off self-destruct protocols without doing anything. It wasn't anything you did directly that caused things to fall apart. It was what stopped working when you said you didn't want to play along. Manipulation-based systems rely on cooperation. Even if people don't want to, they need reactions, fear, confusion, and emotional investment. Things started to break down on their own when you took that fuel out. You didn't tell anyone about it in public. You didn't call out every lie. You didn't try to change the outcome. You just stopped giving the structure food. After that, the pressure that was supposed to crush you had nowhere to go but inside. People began to say things that didn't make sense. Plans got in the way of each other. The stories didn't match up anymore. What used to look planned started to look messy. That's because hidden systems aren't stable by nature. They stay together because people work hard. Someone has to keep telling lies. Someone has to keep people's perceptions in check. Someone has to make sure everyone is on the same page. The balance is off when one person leaves the group, especially if that person was the focus of their attention. The energy eats itself. At first, you noticed it in small ways, like when allies started fighting each other. People started questioning each other, and people started trying to protect themselves instead of the mission. That's a clear sign that things are falling apart inside. You weren't the threat anymore. Distrust was, and it spreads faster than any outside attack ever could. It's ironic that they thought you were weak because you weren't doing anything. In fact, not participating was the worst thing you could do. You forced them to overmanage, over-explain, over-correct, and every over-move shows cracks. It became clearer that they had lost control the harder they tried to get it back. You didn't need to get back at anyone because the structure did that for you. You didn't need proof because the unraveling was clear. The very thing that was supposed to kill you became the source of stress that broke down their internal order. That's how self-destruction really works, not through a big fall, but through a lot of small mistakes made under stress, paranoia, and an unchecked obsession. You didn't pull the trigger. You didn't start the fire. You just stepped back and let the system show how unstable it always was. And when a system shows it can't survive without going after you, its end is already written. Number 11. They find out too late that you can be tracked spiritually. At some point, the plan changed from attacking to watching. They tried to keep an eye on what you were doing, guess what you would do next, and guess how you would react. People try to keep an eye on things when they lose control, but what they ran into was something they didn't get. You don't move in straight lines, and you don't follow a set schedule. Patterns are important for most control systems. It's easy to keep track of someone if they always react the same way, talk about their plans, or move in a way that is expected. You weren't like that. You didn't tell people about changes before they happened. You didn't make decisions based on your feelings that left a mark. You didn't hurry. You moved quietly at times. You stopped completely at times. You would change direction without warning at times. That unpredictability wasn't a mess. It was clear. They tried to read signs, actions, energy, and even the people around you. But nothing stayed the same long enough to make a map. They thought they knew you, but the version of you they thought they knew kept dying. You were already working from a different level of awareness. By the time they got used to it, that's when the frustration turned into fear. Tracking needs access, which made things worse for them. You stopped giving explanations that weren't needed. You stopped giving too much information. You kept some parts of your life to yourself. Not because you were afraid, but because you knew better. That silence wasn't empty. It was safe. And you can't go into protected areas without permission. The more they tried to get close to you, the more it became clear that they were after an image, not the real thing. While you were changing on the inside, they were looking at shadows every time. That's a losing game. Eventually, they came to a troubling realization. You weren't hiding. You were impossible to understand. You weren't trying to hide. There was nothing to hold on to. No consistent emotional output. There were no predictable reactions and no dependency they could link to you. They were already behind by the time they realized this. You had gone deeper than they were aware of, not faster. You weren't running. You were working from a place they couldn't get to. And when someone realizes they can't follow you, guess what you're going to do, or get in the way, without putting themselves in danger. The obsession loses its power, because control only works when you can follow the target you couldn't be. And that's when the chase finally fell apart. Number 12. You didn't learn how to be strong. You remembered how to be strong. You didn't learn what got you through all of this along the way. You didn't learn how to deal with it from books or advice from other people. It went deeper than that. When things got worse, you didn't panic or try to change. You activated. Your endurance came online naturally. Like a muscle you didn't even know you still had. This isn't the first time you've had to deal with pressure like this. You knew the area on some level. You knew when to save energy, when to stay still, when to move, and when to let things happen without getting in the way. You don't learn that kind of knowing in school. It comes from memory, not surface memory, but core memorized kind that stays with you even when you're scared. You settled in when others would have given up. You didn't make the problem seem worse than it was or make the threat seem bigger. You acted like you had been through it before. Even if you couldn't explain how, that calm wasn't denial. It was something they were used to. You knew right away that storms go away and systems break down when they are pushed too hard. Your opponents were confused by how steady you were over time. Short bursts of strength are common, but long-lasting endurance is rare. You didn't get really upset and then crash. You didn't lose your mind or become careless. You stayed calm, even if they couldn't put their finger on it. That told them something was different about you. Just because you remembered endurance doesn't mean you didn't feel pain or tired. It means that those things didn't affect how you made decisions. You didn't let being uncomfortable make you make mistakes. You didn't let being tired change who you are. You took breaks when you needed them and got back to work when you were ready. Most people never learn how to pace themselves. It became clearer and clearer that you weren't going to make it by willpower alone. You were using something that was older, quieter, and much more reliable. You knew that this phase would end at some point, and that your job wasn't to fight all the time but to last. In the end, it wasn't aggression or dominance that set you apart. It was endurance, the kind that doesn't say anything, the kind that waits, remembers, and outlasts everything that wasn't meant to last in the first place. Number 13. The demons were more afraid of you than you were of them. Fear isn't always loud. It can be quiet, sneaky, and not said out loud. And that was exactly what you were up against. Things, people, or energies that are working with bad intentions. They thought that fear, resistance, confusion, and maybe even despair would be enough to bend you. What they didn't expect was that you had a presence that even darkness knows is untouchable. It's easy to think that the person being attacked is at a disadvantage, but the opposite was true. Your clarity, awareness, and calmness weren't just ways to stay alive. They were mirrors that showed everything the other side wanted to keep hidden. Every spell, plan, and move they made was met with a calm that didn't budge. Entities that thrive on chaos can't stand that calm, that surety. You stayed in line as they got more aggressive. The more unpredictable their plans were, the more steady you were. They expected you to react with fear, desperation, or overreaction. Their frustration grew when that didn't happen. That anger is what makes fear grow. They understood that their control was not only slipping away, but also useless. Your lack of fear showed them, not by attacking or dominating, but just by being there without giving in. It's a dangerous energy that doesn't have to yell to be deadly. When someone or something realizes that their usual way of doing things isn't working, they start to make things more complicated, make mistakes, and question themselves. That's fear in its most basic form, not panic, but a sense of instability that makes you lose faith. And here's the truth. Fear spreads to other people once it gets into the system that is supposed to control you. It spreads. Allies begin to have doubts. Plans don't go as planned. People ask about intentions. You didn't make the fear. You showed it. You were never the one under pressure. They were the ones who were. It was too late by the time they understood the imbalance. Fear was already there, but you stayed strong. The one they wanted to control was left alone, while the ones who were doing the controlling were slowly falling apart, haunted by a realization they couldn't fully explain, that whatever they thought they were chasing, controlling, or hurting, it was stronger than they could ever face. Number 14. The last defeat was realizing that they never had power over you. The biggest change didn't happen during a fight, an attack, or a setback. It happened quietly, when the truth hit home. They were never in charge, not of your life, not of where you're going, not of what happens. They thought that everything they did was based on the idea that you were under their control. You weren't. Everything they did relied on borrowed power, which only works when the other person believes in it, is afraid of it, or gives into it emotionally. Their influence went away as soon as you stopped doing that, not on purpose or in a big way, but naturally. You didn't fight back or take over anything. You just stopped seeing an authority that was never real in the first place. That understanding changes everything. When you realize that fear was never really in charge, it loses its power. Threats turn into noise. Pressure turns into trouble. Manipulation becomes clear. You didn't get careless or full of yourself. You got clear. And systems based on lies can't handle clarity. They could feel the change before they could explain it. You stopped talking things over with each other. You stopped asking for permission to live, to move and to choose peace. You didn't ask the thing that was trying to control you for permission or protection. That's when they started to panic, because authority only lasts as long as people recognize it. The last loss wasn't loud. There was no big crash or final showdown. It took them a long time to realize that nothing they did could change your alignment. They couldn't stop things that didn't depend on them. They couldn't control what didn't listen to them. They couldn't stop what wasn't coming from fear. You didn't have to win for this loss to be permanent. You didn't need to get back at them. You didn't need them to help you move on. You left your mind before anything else happened. And after that, the other side won't be able to get anything. The war didn't end because one side was stronger than the other. It came to an end because the false sense of power fell apart. And when that happens, everything that was built on it falls apart by itself. You didn't get away from their control. You found out it was never real. There is one thing that is clear about this whole journey. Nothing that was sent against you worked the way it was supposed to. Not because you fought harder, but because you worked from a place they couldn't reach, change, or stop. What looked like attacks were really exposures. What felt like pressure was really a test of systems that weren't made to deal with people like you. And the more they tried to make something happen, the more it became clear that they could never control you. You weren't lucky. You weren't safe by chance. You were in line. You moved with awareness instead of fear, with restraint instead of impulse, and with clarity instead of chaos. Every plan depended on you reacting on cue, breaking on time, or doubting yourself long enough for them to step in. You didn't. You stayed the same. You kept your eyes open. You stayed who you are. That was all it took to break everything. They weren't beaten by being exposed or confronted. They were beaten by being irrelevant. You got too smart for their tricks, too fast for their tracking, and too strong for their authority without ever saying so. You moved on quietly, bringing insight instead of harm, while they got more and more obsessed. They were trying to win a war that you had already left. People miss this. Real power doesn't need to be validated, make noise, or be in charge. It looks like stability when chaos is expected. It looks clear when things are getting confusing. There is peace where fear is supposed to be, and once you become that, nothing that wants to control you can last long. It's not a coincidence that some parts of this story really hit home. It means you've been through something like this before, and the only way to stop it from happening again is to understand it. If this message meant something to you, stay in touch. Sign up for the channel so you don't miss what's next. Please like this video so that it can reach more people who need it right now. Leave a comment and let your voice be heard. And send this to someone who has been under a lot of stress and doesn't know how much power they really have. This channel isn't about making things sound exciting. It's about giving you information. And if you're here, there's a reason for it.